Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct. We just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Jack, here with my brother Lucas. What's wrong this week?
So this week I've been thinking a lot about the theme of authenticity, and I'll tell you where this came from. So I have a friend who is training to be a pilot. So he's in flight school right now, and he's currently trying to get one of his ratings or certificates, and he's doing it at this place that has a program that's supposed to take only a few days, but he's been there now for a couple of weeks, and the weather and other circumstances of they're just busy during the new year have just delayed his progress, and he's been having a hard time advocating for himself, trying to get the flights that he needs to finish this certificate. And one of the issues is he's been texting me back and forth is just that he seems to not be able to communicate with these people authentically. And I wanted to dig into what that even means and why it's important, because it's something that I've found to be helpful in my communication and the way that I present myself. I try to be as authentic as possible. And I just think that that's something that maybe people struggle with. So let me start by asking you, when I say acting authentically, what does that mean to you?
I think, to me, being authentic is very much so being yourself without judging yourself and, without being afraid of other people judging you for who you are.
There's a few pieces in there that I really like. I think it really does start with knowing yourself, which is something we've talked about a number of times, but it's that idea of defining our own values and beliefs and being clear about how you want to interact with the world, what you're trying to get out of it, being honest with yourself about what it is you want, and then being honest with the world as you try to obtain your goals.
Yeah, it's incredibly important just for the fact that you really can't be yourself unless you know what yourself is in the first place, because without that you're just putting on a persona to try and fit what other people want, and that's not really authentic at all.
No, certainly not. I think that there's an aspect here, though, that you also mentioned that I like, which is sort of this idea of daring to be different, to be unique, truly yourself. Does that resonate?
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%, because everybody is unique. Everyone always says that, but realistically everybody will have some amount of commonality in their uniqueness. It's things that define you and set you apart that are really those things that I think about, like mannerisms or maybe ideas or concepts that you come back to and circle back towards in lots of situations. I think those are really what make you unique in the person that you are.
I want to spend a second here because I think you know that I like to be very precise with the words that I'm using. And even if the word I'm using doesn't maybe mean the same thing to you as it does to me, I like to try to clarify how I'm using those words. So let's take a second and think about what are the pieces that make up authenticity? What does it mean to be an authentic person? I think I have a couple of attributes that come to the top of my head, but I'm curious to get your take on this. The first one I would say is just like being self-aware.
Yeah, and I think that self-awareness is a lot tied into mindfulness and reflection, because being self-aware requires, like you said, to be comfortable with yourself. We've talked about that before, but being comfortable with who you are allows you to be more self-aware and allows you to reflect better on what you're doing. So I 100% think that's one of the big pieces.
Kind of going off of what you just said there, it's this notion of consistency. And what I mean by that is consistency in what you think and how you act. I think a lot of people will, in their mind, try to think one way, but then portray themselves in the world differently. So it's that consistency between what you believe and what you do that I'm talking about.
I noticed it a lot that when people seem to have very, very non-well formed foundations, is how I think of it, is just they're very wishy-washy. They don't have anywhere to stand upon, and they kind of just act very emotionally driven, and they typically are a little bit shadowed. You can't really figure out what they really mean in all situations. It kind of just depends.
I like that idea of shadowy. It's like it's unclear. So another aspect of authenticity is then what I would maybe call transparency. You want to be as clear about what it is that your intentions are as possible, right?
Yeah, 1000%. I mean, if you're gonna be authentic, then people have gotta know what you're about. There are so many times when people just choose to cover themselves with mystery or things of that sort to try and disguise what their true intentions are, but at that point, you're missing that authentic part. You're not being you. You're trying to put on a front and hide your real intentions, which is, in my opinion, can be pretty devious depending upon the intentions.
And I think that there's a point in there around not just, it's not necessarily about trying to deceive all the time. I guess even what I mean is just that oftentimes people might be embarrassed by what it is they really want. And so they're trying to be someone that they think other people want them to be. So when I talk about transparency, it's not always just about being, not trying to hide your actions, but just being willing to even share them. Maybe that's another attribute here, is just that this idea of vulnerability, that like I am willing to share my thoughts even if I'm wrong, and just because, I think that it's worth discussing.
There's no doubt. I mean, being vulnerable it's hard because there is an element of it where you kind of just need to remove that fear of judgment, and it's hard to do. I don't think anybody really can just entirely remove themselves from the fear of judgment. I mean, at that point, I think it's crucial for people to judge you to be able to help you move forward. I think that without it, you're sort of just, going to be stagnant. You got to have something that's pushing you to move forward, or like trying to hold you back that you can push and break through, because really it's beneficial for you to fail. I think my favorite example of this is when you're lifting weights. If you've reached failure during a set, I mean, you've either done the perfect weight and you've gotten what you want, or you went too heavy and you had to stop early. But failure is the only way to success, because I mean, without it, you're just kind of trying to go.
I think you are emphasizing another one of these attributes, which is maybe what I want to call integrity. It's this idea of holding on to your principles and values, even when it's challenging or unpopular. I guess what I really mean is that you need to be willing to push forward and believe in the foundations that you've created for yourself, and making choices that are in harmony with your moral and ethical standards.
100%. I think that the phrase that comes to my mind is, stand firm on your beliefs. Don't be so easily swayed just by what people say. Don't go with the crowd on all the opinions. Stand on what you believe. See if people can really challenge your ideas. I think that something that I've adopted over time is being confident with my ideas, in the sense that I'm not trying to shove them down other people's throats. I'm not trying to make you believe what I believe. I'm just telling you that I will believe what I believe until you can defeat everything that I have, or I can defeat everything that you have to, change my mind.
But I think that there's also like the humility that comes with being willing to be defeated. Like that's what I mean about that vulnerability. It's like I'm going to present this out into the world because I believe it and this is what I've learned up to this point. But I'm perfectly ready to have it shot down in favor of a different perspective that might be more powerful.
Yeah, just welcoming that challenge is something that I've embraced, because the more that I welcome in people challenging my ideas, the further that my thinking is bettered, because it's only once you realize or hear other perspectives that you can deepen and better. I'm trying to think of the word here, but you can make them more concrete. You can make them more firm. You can stand better on your beliefs when they're challenged. You'll fill some of the holes that you may have, or things that you haven't thought of, and maybe your beliefs don't always stay 100% the same. There are bits that are changed or added or removed because you realize things, but they don't have to be 100% changed in any direction. I think that that's just you know, it's an extreme. And extremes are bad. We've gone over that in plenty of detail.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a fluidity to your beliefs, and they should be changing and evolving as you continue to learn and grow. It's not about figuring out the right set of beliefs up today, and then that's going to be the same set of belief that's going to move you forward for the rest of your life. Sure, there may be some of them that stick around, and there may be some that you might recognize but have changed over time. But ultimately, the point is you want to have that set of values in place so that you can keep moving forward. And if you evolve those over time, you're only going to continue to get better at whatever it is you're trying to do. And this is what another, like, this is a huge aspect of being authentic. It's about recognizing that there's always room to grow and learn.
Yeah, I think that one thing that has actually popped in my mind here is that I think one of the big no-nos of being authentic is trying to like compare yourself to other people. Like just trying to, base your own values and decisions upon those that others make is just like sort of a dangerous way to act, because I think that it's highly unauthentic because you're not basing those beliefs off the ones you have on your own, right?
Well, you're hitting on actually the center of my belief system, which is this idea that you can't compare two people's worth. Let me step back for a second, because going back to my pilot friend, one of the biggest problems that he has is that he is constantly seeking external validation. He really wants other people to tell him that he's doing a good job, or that he's on the right track, or that he's, making good choices. He needs that validation to feel like he can move forward. He somehow is not able yet to validate himself, to have internal validation. So this to me is the crux of this idea of comparing people's worth. So in my mind, I fundamentally just believe that people are too complicated to compare on the whole, and our worth is not something that can be measured objectively. You can't look at one person and say they're worth, 753 worth units. It doesn't work that way. So rather than thinking of worth as objective, I think of it as subjective, something that we create for ourselves. We define our own worth by believing that we have worth. And from that perspective, you start to realize that your thoughts and feelings and your experiences matter and should be expressed genuinely, because at that point, if people's worth can't be compared, no one knows better than anyone else. So your perspective is just as valid. And there's no singular correct way to be. There's no standard, no universal standard of comparison.
So one thing that you said there was nobody knows better, and to me that brings up this idea of confidence and arrogance. And I remember we had a really long conversation one time, and you gave me this very very simple phrase, which to me gave me the perfect way to teeter the line between that confidence and arrogance, area. But it was confidence is comfort, and to me that feels a lot like what this is. And it's not the fact that nobody knows better because your view is better than theirs. It's nobody knows better because nobody knows me better than me.
Yeah, I actually define that difference between confidence and arrogance as comparing yourself to others is arrogant versus comparing yourself to yourself is confidence. Like, if you are only ever trying to better yourself, it makes sense to be confident, to believe in yourself, to keep trying to be a better version of yourself. But if you're comparing yourself to other people, it's about, oh, I can do this better than you can do it. And suddenly it becomes a question of ego rather than just your internal motivation and ability to better your desire to better yourself.
Yeah, it's this thing that you need to better yourself based on yourself, because the best, you know, battles that you'll have are with, where you were and where you want to be. you shouldn't be trying to compare yourself to, where other people are, because you don't know what their journey is. You don't know how alike or unalike it is to your own. And it's important to just know that looking to yourself is where you're really going to find the best places to improve.
I mean, I definitely had issues where I, for some time, was comparing myself to others and or did consider myself to be better at certain things than other people. And I don't think that I ever completely believed that I was a better person overall, but I definitely would measure myself relative to others. And I found that that just didn't create the kind of relationships that I wanted in the world. And when I started to think in terms of this idea that we can't compare to people's worth, it made me realize, I should be comparing only to my own baseline and trying to better myself this way. And that by flipping things that way was able to more effectively communicate with people and feel like I wasn't putting them down in order to bring myself up.
I think that's really important, because dragging other people down is just negative. And I think that it hurts other people in trying to be authentic, because it reinforces those negative beliefs that people may have. And I think that supporting people and trying to have them become genuine is important, because it's a difficult thing to be authentic. And when people around you are either actively or knowingly working against it, or working against it subconsciously, makes it a difficult battle, because, this is a bit like what's going on with your friend. He has a hard time advocating, and it's kind of hard to tell someone, you're kind of making it hard for me to be who I am.
Certainly. I find to this idea interesting that I think there's a notion that one needs to find themselves. I hear this a lot of times. People are like, oh, I'm still trying to find myself. I'm just trying to figure out who I am. And while I appreciate the sentiment in there, I just struggle with that idea fundamentally, because I don't think that there is a self to find. I think we create who we are in every moment. And rather than trying to figure out who we're supposed to be, we should embrace who we are and work to improve that if we want to be better.
Yeah, I think it's a little problematic, because I think that one of the connotations that that phrase holds to me is that you will sort of not need to do any work to, go and become the person that you should be or you want to be. You'll just kind of find it. Because to me, finding is not like searching. I think that finding is makes people think that, oh yeah, I just will do all this stuff and eventually I'll stumble upon this thing and I'm gonna figure out exactly who I am. I don't think that's it at all. I think that you need to take control of the situations that you're in, and, really try to see what you can gain from them and reflect upon them and see what you can find based on those things. Because without taking that, control, and that, I guess I'll say authority over what you do for yourself, that responsibility, you'll never make any progress towards, who you want to be.
So I want to clarify quickly that in my mind, actually, this idea of finding yourself, I don't think that there is, or at least when I hear people say it, I do find that they tend to mean that they're wanting to do personal work. They are wanting to work hard to figure out who they are. But I take your point, and I just wanted to make this distinction though with the idea of maybe what we would call soul searching, because I still find this to be a useful practice, but I want to clarify the piece that I struggle with, which is this notion that to find yourself means that there is some perfect representation of yourself that exists that you must find and embody. It's this notion of identity that is flawed because it doesn't accept that who we are is not always the best version of who we could be. It's just who we are in this moment. It's whatever we are doing, whatever we feel, however we act, this is what makes us who we are. And rather than trying to become this perfect version of yourself, rather reflect on where you are and where you'd like to be and see what it's going to take to get you there. And don't try to be more than you are. You know, we have our flaws, and that's part of what makes us who we are, and we should be embracing them and trying to work on them if we want to improve on ourselves.
I 100% agree. I think that was an important distinction to make for sure because, like you said, there are limitations that people have, and trying to exceed those is, I think, a little bit too lofty, and it can deter you from trying to do what you want to do. But I think that pushing them is important, trying to stretch them out, trying to see what your limits are, because I think people will tend to try and put bounds on them. They'll set boundaries that are a little before their limits. So I think that trying to push them is important, but trying to far, far exceed them is simply unrealistic, because really the improvements that you have to make are going to be incremental. And when you think that someone has made some large jump, I tend to not believe that it was one overnight thing. Maybe it is, sometimes it happens, but realistically it's lots and lots and lots of small pieces of work that culminate into one big grand thing which they show off to everybody.
I know what you're talking about. I think that there are these epiphany moments, and I've had them. But even when you have those, it's not like suddenly your behavior just changes overnight. It's like, yes, you now have a new perspective, and that perspective is going to influence the kinds of decisions you make and the way you interact with the world. And that is, like you're saying, that's going to be incremental changes. It is a big change all at once in one sense, but realistically, to integrate it into who you are takes time.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's no perfection in this at all. You can't be perfect with your authenticity. There will be like flaws and cracks in it. There's definitely going to be times when you'll, you know, have to maybe alter who you are a little bit depending upon your situation, because sometimes it calls for it. If you're going into a meeting, maybe you need to meet someone new and you're trying to not actively work against yourself because there are situations which could put you in a either harmful or detrimental position. There are times when you need to realize that maybe part of you being authentic is making sure that you don't want to actively cause problems or hurt yourself. Because for me, that's 100% a thing. I think that if I am aware that I will cause problems or make myself enemies being 100% exactly who I am, then I can change how I am authentically. I don't need to completely change my bases or, you know, try and change who I am. I just know that there are things I maybe need to avoid, steer away from, maybe push in different directions to benefit myself, because realistically, nobody likes being in those sticky situations. And I think that being in them is something that could even harm it. Because if you try and go into those situations and, you're so yourself that it puts you in this bad spot, you're going to start being afraid of it.
I like where you're going with this, especially the notion that sometimes we play roles even though we are still being authentic. Like, you can still be authentic while taking on a persona that's necessary for the task at hand. And I think the point is that you're recognizing the situation and the needs of that particular encounter and responding accordingly based on who you authentically are. I think that's still a very reasonable approach. And being authentic doesn't just mean unfiltered. It doesn't mean you're constantly saying exactly what's on your mind all the time without consideration for others and for what the consequences of your actions. That still needs to be factored in to your authentic approach. So I want to move on to this idea of, in my mind, I tie authenticity to what makes us unique. I think that's the part for me that I focus on. It's recognizing in myself who I am and why I think the way I do, because what makes me unique is exactly my strength. It's what I have that no one else has. And I feel like that's something that is hard for me to communicate to others, is that that's the most powerful thing at your disposal, is precisely what makes you you.
Without a doubt. I mean, everybody is given skills and strengths, and everybody's also given weaknesses with those because that's simply how they work. But playing to those strengths and skills and using them to the best of your ability is absolutely what makes you unique. Because if you're trying to change your strengths and skills to fit a mold that you don't really fit into, that's not being authentic at all. Because frankly, if you want to really be that, authentic vision, I think that you have to maybe sometimes accept that some of the strengths that you have aren't ones that you necessarily like. You may have to embrace things that are uncomfortable, embrace things that you typically reject to find your greatest pieces of success.
Right. We have all kinds of abilities, and it's not just strengths and weaknesses that we're born with or strengths and weaknesses that we develop over the course of our lives. It's also just the experiences that we've had. And some of those are not going to be pleasant, some of them are, but all of them make us who we are. And it's about recognizing that we can use what we've learned in our lives. No matter who we are, where we are, we can find ways to apply the lessons we've learned to take ourselves in a different direction, whatever it is that we want to accomplish, wherever we want to go. Your past and who you are tools that can be used to get you there, no matter how challenging they might have been. I think for me, I always talk about the concept of struggle and how we each have a unique struggle, and that struggle is what actually gives us power because we understand how to overcome our whatever it is that has been holding us back throughout our lives. We have to figure out how to own that struggle and use it to our advantage to push ourselves forward.
Yeah, that resonates incredibly deeply because, I mean, I think you know that I'm a firm believer in the concept that everything happens for a reason and that I am who I am, and that because of that, you need to use everything that you've been given to help you make your decisions. The experiences, like you said, that you have, whether good, bad, the way you deem them, maybe they're not good or bad objectively, need to help you make your decisions and form your beliefs. Because to me, what happens to you should happen. Maybe it's bad, maybe it's negative, maybe you don't like it in the moment, but I think that maybe even if it's not, going with that mindset that it should helps you take lessons away from everything that happens. And I think that taking lessons away from negative situations is something that's incredibly important. It's a good skill to have because life is filled with a lot of negativity and bad things. And if you're going to let those overrun you, then it's just your existence becomes quite miserable and unpleasant, right?
I want to hang on this for a second because it's interesting that we have a similar mentality, but it comes from very different places. What I mean is you use a couple of phrases. One is everything happens for a reason and that whatever happens should happen. I actually take a very different perspective on this, where I think I have more of the existentialist flavor, where I don't think anything happens for a reason. And I think that whatever happens is what happened. And whether or not it I find fault with should or there needs to be reason or meaning behind it. I think that it's okay for it to be meaningless because we make our own meaning. We take what happened to us and give it meaning in the actions that we take, in the decisions that we make.
I think that's interesting because that does resonate deeply with me. I think that sort of what I've done is I sort of worked that giving everything meaning into my philosophy itself. The meaning that I've given to everything is that, it should happen, right? In the sense of, maybe the reason isn't always the same. Should I don't want to have carry the connotation in this case of good. It could be bad. For whatever it did happen, whatever it does, there's something you can take away from it, is what I think really is the important part for me. Because regardless of whether or not you like dealing with those hard situations, they build your character, right? And realistically, that is probably a large part of that, like we said, we don't like finding yourself as the way to put it, but maybe creating the version of yourself that you want to be, right?
Certainly. I think, though, the reason I push back on should is this notion that when bad things happen to us, like, I don't know that they should have happened. If someone grows up and their parent is killed on the street by some freak accident, should that have happened? I don't know if I'm willing to say that, but like, does that mean that we can't take that and use it somehow to better ourselves down the line, even if it was traumatic and even if it's something that created a lot of struggle or difficulty in our lives? I think that there's still ways to use that stuff, even if it was an event that ideally I would say shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think it's definitely harsh because, like you said, ideally you would never want those bad things to happen because those traumas and those damaging experiences can really negatively shape and harm people in the way that they are. But I think, playing back to it, you get to choose how things affect you and how experiences shape you. So I think that taking that sort of harsh vision levels the playing field for all the situations that you're in. As hard as it is to recognize that those situations have those impacts, you need to be able to recognize that it doesn't really help me to sit and dwell on all of these negative aspects, and that if I can reflect and have these things help me, then it's not all bad. There is some sunshine with the rain.
I think I see where you're actually coming from here, which is this notion that if you get to a point where you're happy with who you are, you've accepted that everything that happened to make you who you are is a part of you. And in that sense, it needed to happen to make you who you are. And so as much as those things might have hurt you, they are part of your story and help create the version of you that if you're happy with, in that sense, everything that should have happened because it brought you to where you are today. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, 100%. That's an incredibly well thought out way to put it, because I think that a big part of it is just embracing yourself. Like you said, if you're happy with the person that you are, then the things that happened, I guess, should have happened, right? So I think that something that we've also talked about before that plays into this is, that self-love that you have to have, because to be happy with the person that you are and then to be authentic to other people, to really show that to other people, you have to love who that person is. Because I think there are still situations where people get to places where they are happy, they are where they want to be, but they're not comfortable sharing it and showing it to other people. And I think that there is a loss for not only them, but other people who never get to really see or fully experience those things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on this. I think that I may have brushed over this, but I'm glad you're bringing it back, which is this notion that there is authenticity is both internal and external. There's this place where, yeah, we need to get comfortable with who we are, but to be truly authentic, we also need to project that out into the world. And in doing so, we will give people permission, in a sense, to be their authentic self with us. If they can tell that we're being genuine, they tend to want to do the same thing. And the more we can do that, the more that authenticity will spread, and the more we'll all be able to appreciate each other for who we are and not who we think that we're supposed to be.
I love the notion of that, because I think that who you are supposed to be is actually something that you probably shouldn't be. Because I tend to think that when you form the idea that you should be something, it's probably come from a place of somewhere that you don't actually want to be, and it's been pushed upon you by someone else who believes it, who thinks that you should be there, but maybe you want to be somewhere else. And I think that if people really stuck to their goals and their dreams and to that notion that they want to be exactly who they want to be, then I think that everybody would end up finding that authenticity is simply something that just should be part of who you are.
So, something you said there that sticks out to me. I've noticed in society that we are conditioned to believe that someone else's version of the truth is law. What I mean is, there are these external authorities and moral codes that we are supposed to live by and supposed to strive to achieve. But this disconnects us from our true selves because we alter our lives to fit the narrative of who we think we're supposed to be. And I struggle with that. I reject these external ideals that are imposed upon me, not because I want to just be rebellious, but because I want to create my own code, my own way of living. And I think that it's my responsibility to do that in a way that is prosperous for myself and others around me. And I think that, yes, it's helpful to have guides to tell you, these are approximately the things you want to do to be in good standing. But I think everyone would be better off if they took it upon themselves to form their own belief system, their own moral code, and understand it well enough to act upon it authentically in the world.
I think that diversity in beliefs is something that helps better everybody. If everybody believes the same thing, then you just sort of have a robotic society that doesn't go anywhere.
You'll never have change.
Exactly, and change is necessary for development because without it, who knows? I think that when you're just stagnant for a long time, death is impending because you're never going to be better. So I think that, like you said, trying to not adhere to those, I think of them as like constructs, is important, because if you swear by those as you sort of lose sight of the person who you want to be, and I think that that's also problematic. You will sort of lose that authentic version of yourself that you had in your mind, and start to replace it with the version that other people want it to be.
I agree. I think that I want to get to this idea though of how we could actually develop our authentic self. We're talking about the virtues of being authentic, but how do we develop that? How do we get better at being authentic? And I guess I'll pose it to you as a question first.
Well, I think that to be authentic, the first step has to be, I think, to me, it's accepting the flaws that you have. Because once you can accept the flaws that you have yourself, you're more okay with those being shown to other people, because you realize that it's part of what makes you unique. It's part of what makes you you. And they're not innately bad, they're not innately harmful, and they are simply the things that, they make you you.
I like this. I think you're on the right track in the sense that that is absolutely where you want to get. You want to get to a place where you can accept what those things are, but I think it's hard for people to even identify what those things are. So let me give you a sense of what I'm thinking about here. I'm thinking about practical tools that we can give people to try and move closer to their authentic self. So one for me is just self-reflection. Sitting and thinking about, let's give a few example questions. Things I would ask myself: what truly matters to me? Am I acting in a way that aligns with my values? How do my actions affect others? These kinds of questions, this kind of reflection helps you identify what it is that you're after, how you want to approach it, and the impact that you're going to have by taking actions to move yourself closer to that.
100%. I think that one of the overarching concepts there is understanding your impact on others, because regardless of what you want to think. All of your actions have a ripple effect that will, be felt by other people. And it's sometimes not always fun to think about that. And you don't really want to be responsible for what happens based upon your ideas. But I think there's also a difference between fault and responsibility, and that things that necessarily are your fault don't have to be your responsibility. No, the other way around. Things that are your responsibility necessarily don't have to be your fault.
I think that there's a lesson that I got from our dad is that all of our decisions have consequences. And we need to be aware of what those consequences will be and accept those consequences when we make that decision. We have to understand that it won't always go our way, but when we've decided to do something, once we take action in the world, that's going to have impact. And we need to be prepared to accept the consequences of those actions.
100%. That's one of the best lessons that he ever taught us, because it teaches you that sort of subconscious skill of being able to weigh things out quite quickly. And we talked about the power of the subconscious previously, and I think that this is one of those skills which can sort of be developed into a subconscious thing, because once you sort of begin to learn the consequences that actions have, because a lot of times you're going to make actions that, you can maybe make a connection to something else that you've already done. And eventually I think that it sort of starts to become a automatic practice to, make those decisions and recognize their consequences. And I think a couple of times I've sort of had it where I've just, had to make a decision, and the consequences have just popped into my head like automatically, and I'm like, okay, can I live with them? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, why not? And what can I do to make myself be able to live with the consequences that will happen?
Or what can I do instead?
100%. There's always alternatives, and I think that the important part is not eliminating the consequences, but making them tolerable for your own beliefs.
I mean, even just getting to the point where you ask the question and recognize that, yeah, I'm uncomfortable with this consequence. Even if I'd like to take this action, I'm not prepared that if it doesn't go my way, that this will be the result. And therefore you don't do something that you think you want to do because you recognize that my authentic self would not be comfortable doing this. And that's a perfectly acceptable conclusion to come to. I want to move on to another tool that we have at our disposal. And I come back to this idea of being an effective communicator, which we touched on in other episodes. But in this context, specifically, it's about trying to be more open and honest in your communication. That doesn't always mean being blunt or being, again, unfiltered. It's this notion, though, that we should try to figure out how to more effectively communicate things that are that we're feeling and that we believe in the context of the communication. So if you think someone is wrong, being able to voice your perspective in a way that allows them to help you work through why you're wrong or why they're wrong. And like just being able to do that in a way where people don't feel threatened or combative, just being a little bit more open in a way that allows you to more effectively express your true self. That's one way to work on it. Just try to figure out how to be more open and honest in communication.
Right. I think that something that's helped me is in those situations, I try and shape my communication as something that's, I want to help, right? I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong or I disagree. I'm gonna, I want to ask you why. I want to pick your brain about it, because if I think that you're wrong, you may not necessarily be wrong. Maybe I am, and I just haven't realized it. But I don't want to, attack you for this. I want to try and, not only try to better you, I want to better myself, because I think that that stands to benefit us both.
Yeah, if no one's perspective is more valid than anyone else's, it's a question of exploring that perspective to understand how they came to it and why they believe it, and comparing that to your own experience and understanding the differences that your journey between your journey and their journey, and why your conclusions might be different. And there's something to be learned probably from both parties in every situation like that, because we all get value from seeing a perspective that is not our own.
Absolutely. I think that literally is, like the crux of that last line that we have in our introduction. We're not interested in being correct. We just want to explore our own insights and opinions. And exploring the thoughts that you have, the beliefs, the opinions that you hold are really the most fascinating, fun, and interesting ways to try and better yourself as a thinker.
Love it. Let's cap this off with one more tool that we can use to get closer to our authentic self. And we touched on it earlier, but I'm going to emphasize again this idea of being vulnerable. And for me, that has two components. One is acknowledging our own limitations, and then also being willing to be wrong.
For sure. I mean, the ability to just be wrong and being comfortable with that, I think innately makes you comfortable with improvement. Because once you're okay with being wrong and failing, then you really begin to also, play into one of those other tools that you talked about, which is, self-reflection and mindfulness. Those skills really, really become more and more efficient and useful, because once you're able to be more comfortable with failing or not being correct, you can sort of, take those, it's the statement of take the losses and turn them into lessons. And a lot of the best lessons that you're ever going to gain will be from those times that you have failures or mistakes. And they don't need to be negative experiences that drag you down. They realistically should be things which help bolster you and help move you forward.
I think that's actually a perfect place to end things, because what you've just identified is that these aspects of authenticity play into each other, and they create this virtuous cycle where the more authentic you are, the more you understand yourself, and then the more authentic you can be. And it just creates an ongoing cycle of growth and learning to help you on your journey of creating yourself, becoming yourself. And that's what this is all about.
It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship that this concept has with itself. And it's incredibly intricate, and it was super fun to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the conversation. So much fun.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys enjoyed that episode, you can find us at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. We will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag #WrongIdea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.